Welcome to this deep dive.
Okay.
We're going to be tackling a topic that might make some of you squirm a little bit.
Hmm.
It's chastise.
Hmm.
We're going to go head first into this world of criticism, correction, and how it all plays into personal growth.
I like it.
We have some fascinating source material for this deep dive.
Oh, excellent.
From someone who's looking for advice on how to navigate these conversations, and they bring up some seriously thought-provoking points.
Yeah, what I find really intriguing about this whole deep dive is how it really challenges us to reconsider this knee-jerk reaction we often have to the word chastise itself.
Right. Yeah.
To think about its potential for good and how it can actually be a catalyst for improvement.
For sure. So to kick things off, why don't we jump right into the first big question?
Yeah, okay.
When is criticism actually necessary?
Right.
Because sometimes it's so tempting to just let things slide.
Absolutely. The source makes a really strong case for what they call constructive criticism, which boils down to feedback that's aimed at helping someone get better, not just tearing them down.
I like that.
They actually define it as offering specific and actionable suggestions for improvement delivered with the intent to help someone learn and grow.
Okay, so it's not just about pointing out flaws, but about offering a path forward.
Exactly.
How do we actually go about delivering this constructive criticism?
Yeah, that's the tricky part, right?
Yeah.
Because even with the best intentions, it can be a little bit, well, not tricky.
Yeah, for sure.
The source outlines two approaches, and it really depends on who you're dealing with.
Okay.
For those who are already aware of their shortcomings, they suggest kind of a gentle nudge,
Okay.
a light critique wrapped in care.
I see.
And the goal here isn't necessarily to, change their mind, but to encourage them to think carefully about the potential consequences of their actions.
So it's almost like planting a seed of doubt, encouraging them to self-reflect without being overly forceful.
Exactly. Now, for those who need maybe a little more guidance, they recommend a more hands-on approach.
Okay.
This involves walking through the situation with them clarifying any misunderstandings
Uh-huh.
and really helping them see potential pitfalls that they might have missed.
Okay.
It's about illuminating the path for them step by step.
It's like being a mentor, guiding them towards better choices.
Yeah.
This has me thinking about a time when my boss actually gave me some tough feedback on a project.
Okay.
And I was initially really defensive about it.
Sure.
But she explained her reasoning, offered very specific suggestions,
Mm-hmm.
and reassured me that she really believed in my abilities.
Oh, wow.
It completely changed my perspective.
That's great.
And I ended up doing some of my best work on that project because of her criticism.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
What about you? Have you ever been on the receiving end of criticism that, while maybe tough to hear at the time, ended up being really valuable?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Early in my career, I received some really blunt feedback from a colleague about my presentation style. It stung at first,
Yeah.
but they pointed out specific things I could improve, like using more visuals and engaging the audience better.
Mm-hmm.
And I could tell that it was delivered with a genuine desire to help me succeed.
Yeah.
And it transformed me into a much more effective communicator.
It sounds like intent plays a huge role in how criticism is received.
Yeah, it seems absolutely crucial.
If your criticism comes from a place of genuine care and a desire to help, it's far more likely to be received positively. And the way you frame it matters, too.
Oh, for sure.
Are you coming across as a know-it-all or as someone who genuinely wants to see them succeed?
Right. Okay, so we've talked about when criticism is necessary
Yay.
and how to approach it constructively.
Yeah.
But what about those situations where we're hesitant to step in at all?
Okay.
Those times when we're worried about overstepping boundaries or potentially doing more harm than good?
Yeah, that's a great point. And the source actually addresses that directly. They emphasize this delicate balance between helping and overstepping, reminding us that we can guide and advise, but ultimately the individual has to choose to change.
Right.
We can't force someone to accept our feedback or take our advice.
It's like that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes pushing too hard can backfire. We have to be mindful of the potential for collateral damage, as the source puts it.
Right.
Even well-intentioned criticism can be hurtful, especially if the recipient is feeling defensive or vulnerable.
So how do we navigate this?
Yeah.
How do we know when to step back and let someone figure things out on their own?
That's where discernment and empathy come into play.
Okay.
We have to assess the situation, consider the individual's emotional state, and recognize that sometimes the best way to help is to simply offer support and let them find their own way. It's not always easy,
Right.
but it's a crucial skill to develop.
It sounds like knowing when to offer advice and when to just listen is a real art form.
It is.
But, you know, this deep dive got me thinking about how cultural differences might influence all of this. I mean, what's considered constructive criticism in one culture could be seen as totally off base in another, right?
Absolutely. That's a fascinating point, and the source touches on this by highlighting the challenges faced by children growing up in immigrant families.
Okay.
Imagine navigating not just one set of cultural norms, but two,
Wow.
your parents and the wider society you're growing up in.
That's got to be tough.
It is. It's incredibly complex, and as the source points out, these kids essentially have to become cultural translators, constantly adapting and interpreting different perspectives on discipline and correction.
Right.
They have to learn to both accept and give cultural criticism, which is a pretty advanced skill,
Yeah.
especially for someone still figuring out their own identity.
So how can we be more sensitive to these cultural nuances, especially when giving feedback? I mean, I wouldn't want to accidentally offend someone because I wasn't aware of their cultural background.
Yeah, it's a really important consideration. It starts with recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to criticism.
Okay.
What might be considered direct and helpful in one culture could be perceived as harsh and disrespectful in another.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to step outside our own cultural framework and try to understand the other person's perspective.
So it's about active listening and being open to different ways of communicating.
Exactly.
Okay, now this next part of the source material really threw me for a loop.
Okay.
It tackles the question of whether harsh criticism can actually be a catalyst for growth.
Huh.
I mean, at first glance, it seems kind of counterintuitive,
Yeah.
right? But they make a surprisingly compelling argument.
They do. They acknowledge the sting of harsh critique, but suggest that it can be valuable if, and this is a big if, the intent behind it is truly good.
Right.
Sometimes those tough, even blunt comments can contain nuggets of truth that we might not be willing to hear any other way.
So it's like they're shaking us out of our comfort zone, forcing us to confront things we might be avoiding.
Exactly.
But how do we distinguish between criticism that's meant to help us and criticism that's just plain hurtful? Because let's be honest, some people just like to tear others down.
That's true. That's where discernment comes in.
Yeah.
The source suggests trying to focus on the message, even if the delivery is less than ideal.
Okay.
Can you identify any truth in what they're saying, even if it's wrapped in a layer of negativity?
It's about separating the wheat from the chaff, right? Finding those valuable kernels of truth amidst the harsh words.
Exactly.
I remember a professor I had in college who was notorious for his brutal critiques.
Oh,
He ripped apart our essays, leaving us feeling completely demoralized.
wow.
But you know what? He also pushed us to think critically and write more clearly than we ever thought possible.
Interesting.
Looking back, I realized that his harshness, while maybe not the most pleasant experience, ultimately helped me become a better writer.
It sounds like he was pushing you to reach your full potential, even if his methods were a bit unconventional.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that tough love isn't always the best approach.
Right.
It really depends on the individual and the situation.
So when might this direct, even harsh style of criticism actually be effective?
Yeah.
Because it seems like it could easily backfire.
It's certainly a high-risk, high-reward approach. It might be warranted in situations where someone is engaging in behavior that's harmful to themselves or others,
Okay.
and gentler approaches haven't worked.
So like an intervention.
Exactly. Think of an intervention for someone struggling with addiction.
Right.
The goal is to break through their denial and get them the help they need, even if it means delivering some hard truths.
Okay, so in those extreme cases, it might be necessary to shake things up.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's crucial to make sure the person knows you're coming from a place of caring, not judgment.
Absolutely. Tough love without genuine care is just cruelty. It's about finding that balance between honesty and empathy and tailoring your approach to the individual and the circumstances. And sometimes the most effective approach is to simply hold space for someone,
Yeah.
listen without judgment, and offer support.
That's a good reminder that sometimes the best thing we can do is just be there for someone without trying to fix them or offer unsolicited advice. Now, the source also delves into a distinction that I found particularly interesting.
Okay.
Public versus private correction.
Okay.
They suggest that public criticism can actually foster accountability, especially if we agree with the critique.
Interesting. How so?
Well, the idea is that by making the criticism public, We create a sense of eyes watching that can motivate us to change our behavior.
I see.
It taps into our desire to be seen as good and worthy,
Yeah.
and that can be a powerful force for positive change.
So it's like we're holding ourselves accountable to a larger group, not just to ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I can also see how public criticism, even if well-intentioned, could be really damaging, especially for someone who's already feeling insecure or vulnerable.
For sure, public shaming, even in the name of accountability, can have devastating consequences.
Right.
And that's where the importance of private correction comes in.
Yeah.
It allows for a more nuanced and compassionate approach, one that focuses on helping the individual grow without the added pressure of public scrutiny.
So it seems like finding the right balance between public accountability and private support is key. And it probably depends a lot on the specific situation and the individuals involved, right?
Absolutely. There's no easy formula. It requires careful consideration, empathy, and a willingness to adapt our approach based on the unique circumstances.
It really does feel like a balancing act, doesn't it? Figuring out the best way to approach these situations.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're constantly recalibrating, taking into account all these different factors. But I have to say, this deep dive has given me a whole new perspective on Chastise.
Yeah.
It's definitely a more nuanced concept than I initially thought.
What's fascinating is that while the source dives deep into the dynamics of giving and receiving criticism from others, it doesn't really address the elephant in the room,
Okay.
self-criticism.
Ooh, that's a good point.
You know, we've been so focused on how other people criticize us that we haven't even touched on how we criticize ourselves.
Right.
And let's be honest, sometimes we can be our own harshest critics.
Oh, for sure.
That inner voice can be relentless, constantly picking apart our flaws and magnifying our mistakes.
Yeah.
But here's the question.
Sure.
Can we apply the same principles we've been discussing to our self-criticism? Can we make it more constructive, more focused on growth rather than self-flagellation?
I love that question. It's like turning the lens inward, examining our own critical voice with the same level of awareness and intention that we apply to external criticism.
Exactly. So instead of berating yourself for every misstep,
Right.
how about trying to reframe that inner critic as a coach? Someone who's there to guide you, to help you learn from your mistakes and become a better version of yourself.
So instead of saying, I messed that up, I'm so stupid, it's more like, okay, what can I learn from this experience? How can I do better next time?
Precisely. It's about shifting from self-judgment to self-compassion while still holding yourself accountable for growth. It's a delicate balance, but one that's worth striving for.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive.
It has.
We covered so much ground,
We have.
from recognizing when criticism is necessary to navigating cultural differences and even exploring the surprising potential of harsh feedback.
It's been a journey.
It has. And now we're left with this powerful question.
Okay.
How can we apply these insights not just to our interactions with others, but also to our own self-reflection?
It's a question I encourage you to explore further, because ultimately the most important relationship we have is the one with ourselves. And learning to cultivate a healthy, compassionate, and growth-oriented inner critic is essential for living a fulfilling and meaningful life.
So to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. Whether you're on the giving or receiving end of criticism, remember,
Yes.
intent, context, and empathy matter.
They do.
Keep those in mind. And even the most difficult conversations can become opportunities for growth. And don't forget to turn that critical lens inward and examine how you talk to yourself.
Right.
After all, we all deserve a little bit of self-compassion on this journey of personal growth. So it seems like finding the right balance between public accountability and private support is key. And it probably depends a lot on the specific situation and the individuals involved. Right?
Absolutely. There's no easy formula. It requires careful consideration, empathy, and a willingness to adapt our approach based on the unique circumstances.
It really does feel like a balancing act, doesn't it? Figuring out the best way to approach these situations. It's almost like we're constantly recalibrating, taking into account all these different factors.
Yeah.
But I have to say, this deep dive has given me a whole new perspective on Chastise.